Chapter 1. The Silent Arrival. The hum of Novapulse's headquarters filled the air as the morning sun filtered through the towering glass walls, casting streaks of light across the polished marble floor. It was Monday, a day that typically buzzed with the clatter of keyboards, the hiss of coffee machines, and the hurried footsteps of employees racing to meet deadlines. Nestled in the heart of a sprawling tech district, Nova Pulse wasn't just another company, it was a beacon of innovation. Its name synonymous with cutting-edge software design. Neon lights pulsed along the edges of the sleek lobby, bathing the space in hues of electric blue and violet, a constant reminder of the company's bold vision. But this Monday was different. Something, or someone, new was about to shift the rhythm of the place. Daniel Carter rolled through the wide automatic doors, his wheelchair gliding smoothly over the threshold. He was a man of quiet intensity, his dark brown eyes sharp and observant, framed by a face weathered by experience rather than age. At 38, he carried himself with a confidence that didn't shout but simmered beneath the surface. His attire was understated, a crisp gray button-up shirt, dark slacks, and a simple leather jacket that hinted at practicality rather than flash. To the untrained eye, he might have been a visitor, perhaps a consultant or a lost delivery driver. But Daniel was none of those things. He was the newly appointed CEO of Nova Pulse, a decision made by the board just days ago. Yet, instead of arriving with fanfare, trumpeted by emails and a formal announcement, he had chosen a different path. He wanted to see the company's true colors, unfiltered by the polish of prepared welcomes. The lobby was alive with movement. Employees darted past, clutching laptops or steaming mugs, their conversations a low murmur punctuated by bursts of laughter. A few glanced at Daniel as he maneuvered toward the center of the space, their eyes lingering briefly on the wheelchair before flicking away. Curiosity flickered in their expressions. But no one approached. That was fine by him. Anonymity was his shield, at least for now. He paused near a sleek reception desk, its surface glowing faintly with embedded LED strips, and took in the scene. The air smelled of espresso and ambition, a heady mix that reminded him why he'd fought so hard to reach this point. Nova Pulse wasn't just a job, it was a legacy he intended to shape. Across the room, Olivia Grant strode through the chaos with the precision of a predator. At 42, she was the head of customer service, a role she'd clawed her way into through years of unrelenting determination. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, a staccato rhythm that announced her presence long before her voice did. Dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, Olivia exuded authority, or at least the version of it she'd cultivated. To her, power was a currency, and she spent it freely, often at the expense of those she deemed unworthy. She wasn't cruel in the obvious sense, her barbs were subtle, delivered with a smile that never reached her pale blue eyes. But her reputation preceded her. Employees whispered about her cold dismissals, her refusal to bend, and the way she could make you feel invisible with a single glance. Olivia's morning had already been a mess. A client complaint had landed in her inbox at 6 a.m., followed by a junior staffer's botched report that she'd had to rewrite herself. Her patience, thin on the best of days, was fraying at the edges. As she crossed the lobby, her gaze landed on Daniel. He was stationary now, hands resting lightly on the rims of his wheelchair, his posture relaxed yet oddly commanding. To Olivia, he didn't fit. The lobby was for employees, polished, purposeful people who belonged in the Nova Pulse ecosystem. This man, with his casual jacket and unhurried demeanor, was an intruder in her carefully curated world. Her lips pursed as she adjusted her trajectory, making a beeline for him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, her head tilting just enough to signal impatience. "This area is for employees only. I'm not sure how you got in here, but I can direct you to the visitor's desk if you're lost." Her tone was clipped, laced with a condescension she didn't bother to mask. She assumed he'd shrink under her scrutiny. Most people did. Daniel didn't flinch. He met her gaze steadily, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken challenge. "Actually," he said, his voice low and even, "I'm exactly where I need to be." There was no hostility in his words, Just a quiet certainty that threw Olivia off balance. She blinked, her confident facade faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "I don't think so," she replied, her lips curling into a faint, dismissive smile. "This isn't a public space. If you're here for an interview or something, you're in the wrong place. Let me help you find your way out." She gestured toward the exit, her tone implying that she was doing him a favor. Around them, a few employees slowed their pace, sensing the tension but not yet grasping its weight. Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her. He could see the gears turning in her mind, the snap judgment. The dismissal rooted in assumptions she hadn't bothered to question. It wasn't the first time he'd faced this, and it wouldn't be the last. But today, it carried a different stakes. "I appreciate the offer," he said, his voice still calm, "but I'm staying right here." Olivia's smile vanished, her arms dropped to her sides, and she took a step closer, her patience evaporating. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private company. If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out." Her words were sharp now, edged with a threat she clearly believed she could enforce. She didn't see the man in front of her, she saw a problem to be solved. A disruption to her order. Before Daniel could respond, a new voice broke through the standoff. "Olivia, stop." It was Mia Torres, the regional director's assistant, hurrying across the lobby. Her dark hair bounced as she moved, her wide eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. Unlike Olivia, Mia knew the truth. She'd been in the closed-door meeting where Daniel's appointment was finalized. And she'd been warned about his unorthodox plan. Her heart sank as she realized what was happening. Olivia turned, irritation flashing across her face. "What is it, Mia? I'm handling this." Mia's voice trembled as she spoke, loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear. "That's Daniel Carter. He's our new CEO." The words hit like a shockwave. Olivia froze, her breath catching as the reality sank in. Around her, the lobby seemed to hold its breath, the hum of activity replaced by a stunned silence. Daniel leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair, his gaze never leaving Olivia. The game had just begun. Chapter 2. The Neon Reckoning. The silence in the Nova Pulse lobby was deafening, a stark contrast to the usual Monday morning buzz. The neon lights flickered faintly along the walls, casting an eerie glow over the frozen tableau. Mia Torres stood breathless, her words still echoing in the air. "That's Daniel Carter. He's our new CEO." The revelation hung like a guillotine, its blade poised above Olivia Grant's carefully constructed world. Employees who had slowed to watch the confrontation now stood rooted to the spot, their faces a mix of shock, curiosity, and something darker, anticipation. The air crackled with the weight of what was about to unfold. Olivia's head snapped back to Daniel, her pale blue eyes widening as if she could will the words away. Her arms, which had been poised to gesture with authority just moments ago, fell stiffly to her sides. The confident tilt of her chin dissolved into a slack-jawed stare. And for the first time in years, she felt the ground shift beneath her polished heels. "What?" she managed, her voice a brittle whisper, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to reset the scene, to rewind to a moment where she still held the upper hand. Daniel didn't move. He sat there, hands resting lightly on the rims of his wheelchair, his posture unchanged, calm, deliberate, unshaken, his dark eyes locked onto hers, not with anger or triumph, but with a piercing clarity that made her squirm. "Daniel Carter," he repeated, his voice steady and low, as if introducing himself for the first time. "I started today." The simplicity of the statement belied its power. It wasn't an accusation or a boast, it was a fact, delivered with the weight of inevitability. Mia stepped forward, her face flushed with a mix of panic and urgency. "Olivia, I tried to," she began, but Olivia cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand, her composure fracturing further. "This can't be right," Olivia said, her tone rising as she turned to Mia. "There was no announcement, no memo. I would have known." Her words were a desperate grab for control, a lifeline to pull her out of the humiliation sinking into her bones. But Mia only shook her head, her expression apologetic yet firm. "It was intentional. He wanted to see us as we are." The implication landed like a slap. Olivia's gaze darted back to Daniel, and for a fleeting moment, fear flickered in her eyes. She'd spent years building her reputation at Nova Pulse, unyielding, efficient, untouchable. She'd thrived on the power of her position, wielding it like a weapon to keep others in line. But now, that power was slipping through her fingers, exposed as fragile under the scrutiny of the man she'd just dismissed. Around her, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of murmurs from the employees who'd witnessed her unraveling. Some exchanged glances, others hid smirks behind their hands. Olivia Grant, the iron-fisted manager, was crumbling in real time. Daniel leaned forward slightly, the faint creak of his wheelchair breaking the tension. "It's interesting," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "How quickly people judge what they don't understand." He paused, letting the words settle, his gaze sweeping the room before returning to Olivia. "You saw me and decided I didn't belong. Why?" It wasn't a question meant to be answered, not yet. It was a mirror, held up to reflect her actions. And Olivia flinched as if burned. I didn't mean," she stammered, her hands fumbling at her sides as she searched for an excuse. Her mind raced, replaying the last few minutes, the way she'd approached him, the condescension in her tone, the casual threat of security. Each memory was a brick in the wall of her own making. And it was collapsing around her. "I thought you were someone else," she finished weakly, the lie so thin it barely held together. Daniel's expression didn't change, but the faintest arch of his brow told her he wasn't buying it. Mia shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasped in front of her. She'd always been wary of Olivia's sharp edges, but seeing her flounder now was unsettling. "Mr. Carter," Mia said, her voice softer, "I'm so sorry about this. It's not how we—" Daniel raised a hand, silencing her gently. "It's not your apology to make," he said, his tone kind but firm. He turned his attention back to Olivia, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his focus. "You're the head of customer service, correct?" Daniel asked, though it was clear he already knew. Olivia nodded mutely, her throat too tight to speak. "Then you, more than anyone, should know that respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we do here." His words were measured, each one landing with precision. Nova Pulse builds solutions for people, all people. If you can't see that, you're not just failing me. You're failing everyone in this room. The lobby had grown deathly quiet, the employees now a captive audience to the drama unfolding. Some nodded subtly, others stared wide-eyed, absorbing the gravity of Daniel's words. For years, Olivia's reign had been a source of tension, her biting remarks, her refusal to listen, her habit of elevating herself by stepping on others. They'd tolerated it because she got results, because she was untouchable. But now, that illusion was shattering, and they watched with a mix of relief and unease as the balance of power shifted. Olivia's face flushed red, then drained to an ashen white. "I didn't know who you were," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of defiance and desperation. "If I'd known," she stopped herself, realizing the trap she'd walked into. If she'd known, she wouldn't have treated him that way. The admission hung unspoken, damning her more than anything she could say. Daniel's eyes softened, but only slightly. "That's the point," he said quietly. "It shouldn't matter who I am, or who anyone is." He straightened in his chair, his presence filling the space despite his stillness. "This company isn't just about code or profits. It's about people, and if we can't treat each other with dignity, we've already failed." The words resonated, rippling through the crowd. A few employees clapped tentatively, the sound growing into a wave of applause that startled Olivia. She stood there, isolated in the center of the lobby, her world tilting as the applause washed over her like a tide. It wasn't just approval for Daniel, it was a rejection of everything she'd represented. Her hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms as she fought to hold onto the last threads of her dignity. Mia stepped closer to Daniel, her voice low. "What do you want to do about this?" she asked, glancing nervously at Olivia. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at Olivia, then at the employees, their faces lit with a cautious hope. "Change starts now," he said finally, loud enough for all to hear. "But it's not over yet." Olivia's fate hung in the balance, and the neon lights flickered on, illuminating the reckoning she could no longer escape. Chapter 3. The Dawn Beyond the Neon. The applause in the Nova Pulse lobby faded into a hushed stillness, leaving behind a palpable tension that clung to the air like static. The neon lights pulsed rhythmically along the walls, their glow casting long shadows across the marble floor. Daniel Carter sat at the center of it all, his wheelchair a quiet anchor in the storm he'd just unleashed. His words, "Change starts now," echoed in the minds of the employees. A promise and a challenge rolled into one. For Olivia Grant, however, they were a death knell, the final note in a symphony of her own making. She stood isolated, her once imposing figure diminished under the weight of her actions, her pale blue eyes darting as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Daniel's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, not with malice but with a measured resolve. He'd seen her kind before, people who wielded power like a shield, only to find it brittle when tested. "Olivia," he said, his voice cutting through the silence with a calm authority that demanded attention. "You've been with Nova Pulse for years. You've built a team, met targets, delivered results, but none of that matters if it's built on tearing others down." He paused, letting the words sink in, his dark eyes steady. "This isn't just about today. It's about a pattern, and it stops here." Olivia's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the turmoil beneath her crumbling facade. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to claw back the control slipping through her fingers. But the eyes of her colleagues, once averted in fear or deference, now bore into her with a quiet judgment she couldn't deflect. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an unspoken consensus. Her reign was over. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and managed a weak nod, more out of reflex than agreement. Mia Torres stepped forward, her expression a mix of relief and unease. She'd worked under Olivia's shadow long enough to know the damage her arrogance had wrought, missed opportunities, stifled voices, a team held together by fear rather than trust. "Mr. Carter," Mia said, her voice steady despite the nerves flickering in her eyes. "What happens next?" It was the question on everyone's mind, the bridge between this moment of reckoning and the future Daniel had promised. Daniel turned his wheelchair slightly, facing the gathered employees. Their faces were a mosaic of emotions, hope, curiosity, apprehension. He took a deep breath, the weight of his new role settling fully on his shoulders. "What happens next is up to all of us," he said, his tone firm yet inclusive. "Nova Pulse isn't just a name on a building or a line of code on a screen. It's a commitment to innovation. Yes, but also to each other. Discrimination, arrogance, exclusion, they have no place here. Not today, not ever." His words were a rallying cry, and the employees straightened, some nodding as the vision took root. He turned back to Olivia, his expression softening but unyielding. "You're suspended, effective immediately," he said, "the decision final. HR will review your conduct, not just this morning, but the complaints that have piled up over time. You'll have a chance to explain yourself. But understand this. Respect isn't negotiable. If you can't live that, you don't belong here." The words were delivered without venom, a statement of fact rather than a personal attack. But to Olivia, they were a guillotine's fall, severing her from the identity she'd clung to for so long. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a murmur of approval. Olivia's face drained of color, her hands clenching into fists as she fought to hold back the tide of humiliation. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, realizing there was no defense left to muster. With a jerky nod, she turned on her heel and strode toward the exit, her heels clicking a hollow rhythm against the floor. The sound faded as the glass doors slid shut behind her, leaving a void where her presence had once loomed. For the first time in years, the lobby felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. Daniel watched her go, then addressed the room again. "This isn't about punishment," he said, his voice rising to fill the space. "It's about accountability. We all have a role in what this company becomes. I'm not here to rule over you, I'm here to build with you. Let's make Nova Pulse a place where every idea, every voice, every person matters." The employees erupted into applause, louder and more heartfelt than before. It wasn't just agreement, it was a release, a shared resolve to move forward together. As the crowd dispersed, returning to their desks with a renewed energy, Mia lingered near Daniel. "That was incredible," she said, a small smile breaking through her usual reserve. I've never seen them like this. Inspired. I mean, Daniel returned the smile, though his was tinged with quiet determination. It's a start, he replied, but it's only the beginning. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the neon lights of Novapulse glowed brighter against the dusk, Daniel sat alone in his new office. The space was sparse, still unpacked, but the view through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, a city alive with possibility. He leaned back in his wheelchair, his mind replaying the day's events. Olivia's fall wasn't a victory, it was the spark. Building a culture of respect would take more than one speech, more than one decision. It would take consistency, day after day, choice after choice. He was ready for that fight. Downstairs, the employees packed up for the night, their conversations buzzing with a new kind of excitement. They spoke of Daniel's words, of the shift they'd felt, of the chance to be part of something bigger. Mia, locking her desk, felt a flicker of pride. She'd always believed in Novapulse's potential. And now she saw a path to it. Even those who'd stayed silent under Olivia's rule began to imagine a future where they could speak up, where they belonged. The story of that Monday morning spread beyond the glass walls of Novapulse. A quiet ripple in a sea of corporate tales. It wasn't just about one company or one man. It was a reminder that power built on exclusion is a house of cards, destined to collapse. Daniel knew this, and as he gazed out at the neon-lit horizon, he made a silent vow to lead with integrity, to listen, to lift others up. It was a promise not just to Novapulse, but to himself. The lights flickered on, steady and bright, illuminating a new dawn, one where respect wasn't a policy, but a way of being. And under that glow, Novapulse began to shine anew. Dive into words beneath the neon lights. A gripping tale of justice and transformation at Novapulse, a cutting-edge tech company. Daniel Carter, the new CEO, arrives unannounced in a wheelchair to uncover the true culture of his firm. When Olivia Grant, an arrogant manager, mocks him and demands he leave, she unknowingly seals her fate. As Daniel's identity is revealed, her career crumbles in an instant, exposing the cost of prejudice. Through a powerful confrontation, Daniel inspires a shift toward respect and inclusivity, leaving employees energized and hopeful. This story of accountability and renewal reminds us that true leadership builds bridges, not walls. Watch to see how one moment sparks a revolution in a neon-lit world, proving that dignity is non-negotiable. Subscribe for more real-life lessons that inspire change.